Friends, we are truly living in unprecedented times right now. People are going to look back to us in generations. Our grandchildren are going to come to us and say, "Grandpa, Grandma, what was it like to be alive in early July 2026? What were the celebrations like? What were the festivities like as we approached that milestone occasion of Taylor Swift marrying Travis Kelce?" What a time to be alive, right? Now, you know that we also had another milestone occasion over this past weekend. That is America's 250th birthday, the semi-quincentennial, which is why we are looking at some foundational American texts over this past month through a project called Faith 250. Now, today, we come to the text that is, the reason for the celebration of this particular weekend, the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson in the year 1776, and the first person signed it yesterday on the 4th of July. Now, there's some audacity in simply declaring independence. I'm sure that it's probably felt about as awkward to the English hearing it as in this particular scene right here.
I declare bankruptcy!
So Michael's employees would have to go on to tell him that that's not exactly how you declare bankruptcy. The English army tried to tell the Americans that that's not how you declare independence. Luckily, they were unsuccessful in doing so. But whenever you look at the Declaration, the line that is really the linchpin point for everything, not only of that document, but also of us as a nation, is this one: all men are created equal. All men are created equal. What soaring rhetoric in these simple 5 words. This right here is the foundation of what it is to be American. This is the American dream encapsulated in 5 simple words. People think that the American dream is getting a job and buying a house, but in reality, that's only the what. The why of that is this statement: all men are created equal. This is how it all happens. You see, you don't have to be born into the aristocracy. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't even have to have the right education. No, because all men are created equal in this country. We have opportunities that much of the world could never even dream of. And yet, if we really examine this language, we would, note that today we would probably say all men and women are created equal, or all people are created equal. Sometimes simply saying men is a way, sort of an antiquated way of saying all men and women or all people are created equal. But I don't really think that that's what the founders had in mind. In fact, I know that it's not exactly what they had in mind because, we've got letters. They wrote lots of letters in those days. We've got lots of great journals and letters and stuff. It was like the most literate generation of all time. It's amazing, their writing, if you go back to the original sources from 250 years ago. And so anyways, here is this remarkable letter that Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John. She implored him, remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. She would actually go on to say something about how the women wouldn't consider any laws binding if they didn't have representation in them, and they were willing to rebel if need be, if the husbands didn't listen to the wives. The parallels between fighting for representation and also the willingness to rebel if they had to, the parallels are unmistakable between what the founders were going for. But of course, you know that they didn't remember the ladies, and this was a fight for some time after this. I was recently reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and in it he tells this story of how one time he was fighting with his slave master, and as he was doing so, the slave master's wife came along, and the slave master implored his wife to join him, to help him in this fight, to subdue this slave that he could not subdue or even really land a blow upon. But she refused. And so the slave master turned the force of his anger from Frederick Douglass, that he wasn't able to land a blow upon, to his wife. And reflecting back on it years later, Frederick realized that even though he was the slave, in that situation, the slave master's wife was really the slave. We would all do well if we would continue to remember the ladies even today. Now, there's a long history of us fighting for all these words to be truly embodied and lived into. We would get a glimpse in about 10 years after the Declaration, with the Constitution, with the institution of the 3/5 Compromise, about whether the founders really thought of enslaved people as being created equal, along with the free white citizens. And in addition to that, on a much more personal level for Jefferson over the course of his life, the very same man who said all men are created equal, owned 600 humans and also fathered 6 through his slave Sally Hemings. So, because these priorities of ours have had a challenging time being lived into, we have the record of people who were fighting for them to be lived into. People like Frederick Douglass, who in 1852 would step to the mic on the 4th of July, and actually the 5th, but who's counting, and ask the question, what to the slave is the 4th of July? See, it was less a critique of the Declaration and more of a pleading with America to live into its values. And then a few decades later, on America's centennial celebration in 1876, Susan B. Anthony would fight to the mic and read the Declaration of Rights of the Women of the United States. It would be another 100 years, approximately, after the Declaration for enslaved people to receive their freedom, and another 200 years after the Declaration for the end of segregation. It would be about 150 years after the Declaration on what would have been Susan B. Anthony's 100th birthday for women to receive the right to vote. And so, whenever we look at the Declaration, we follow the line of those who have fought for us to live into the values that all men and women are created equal. And it's not all critique, because the reality is that it's this document, the Declaration of Independence right here, that has been so powerful for people who have been pushed to the margins. You see, they, more than anybody else, have fought for that right. There's enough ambiguity in the statement, all men are created equal, that people like Frederick Douglass, people like Susan B. Anthony, have been able to fight for us to actually live into that stated value whenever all men are created equal. So for us as frail human beings, it's been a journey of fighting, a journey of trying to more fully and faithfully live into these values, but not so with God. You see, with God, it's been this way from the very beginning. We read in the very first chapter of the Bible, God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them, male and female. God created them. You see, there are less inclusive translations of the Bible than this particular one, but even in the 1611 version of the King James Bible, which predates our declaration by 162 years, it notes that men and women are created in the divine image. Our language has limitations, that's for sure, but it's been clear from the very beginning that God knows, and more importantly, God created each and every single one of us in God's own image, and so we are all created equal in the eyes of God. It's we humans who make distinctions about who is unequal. It's we as humans who are still trying to live up to the values that God has lifted up from the very beginning, from the creation of the universe. So as we look forward, we would do well to return to the words of Abigail Adams again, writing after the Declaration had already been signed, writing after the American Revolution had already been fought, writing after the ratification of the Constitution, and writing after the inauguration of the first president. She had this to say: "Nothing hinders our being a very happy and prosperous people, provided we have wisdom rightly to estimate our blessings and hearts to improve them." Is there room? Room in your heart? Room for improvement? Are you trying to improve to the point where we live into our values that all men are indeed created equal, just as God has set forth from us from the very beginning? Are you willing to do the hard work of taking us from where we are to where we need to go with the help of God, so that all people know that they have inherent dignity and value and worth? May we all have hearts to improve them.